Good morning and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Thank you for joining us for today's NACo's webinar focused on disaster mitigation and utilizing the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities BRIC program. My name is Deborah Lucero and I'm a supervisor in Butte County, California. It's my honor to also serve as the chair of the National Association of Counties Resilient Counties Advisory Board and as a vice chair of NACo's Environment, Energy, and Land Use Steering Committee and the NACo Rural Action Caucus. Before we begin the webinar, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the NACo website after the webinar finishes. We'll also include the presentation materials. If you have any questions, please open the Q&A icon on your toolbar and enter your questions there. This will allow our guest speakers to track questions and follow up with you. If you need technical assistance, drop a note into the chat box, which is also located on your toolbar. You can also ask questions at any time by emailing questions@naco.org. Now, turning to the focus of today's webinar, pre-disaster mitigation and planning, September is National Preparedness Month, with the theme of this year, Prepare to Protect. This discussion is extremely important and timely to county leaders, as counties across the nation continue to grapple with impacts and effects of disasters, such as wildfires and drought across the West, and the recent Hurricane Ida in the Gulf, for example. My county, Butte County, California, has faced devastation from multiple wildfires. Also, the Oroville Dam spillway crisis, where 180,000 people were evacuated, and now COVID, which we are all grappling with. As county leaders face these disasters, the importance of building more disaster resilient communities is increasingly imperative. To support states, local governments, tribes, and territories in reducing the risks they face from disasters and natural hazards, the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC program, aims to categorically shift the federal focus from reactive disaster spending and toward research-supported proactive investments in community resilience. With $1 billion available in BRIC funding this year, fiscal year 2021, and the application period to apply is opening on September 30th, awareness of this funding and assistance in accessing this funding is timely. NACo is grateful to be joined by our corporate partners at Tidal Basin today to lead an informative and interactive discussion on BRIC and how counties can access this funding to build more resilient communities. Later, Supervisor James Gore of Sonoma County will lead a peer discussion. From Tidal Basin, we are joined today by Carlos Castillo, Senior Vice President and Chief Development Officer, Jacob Gray, Director of Mitigation, and Jose Valenzuela, Senior Director of Mitigation. Thanks so much to the Tidal Basin team for your partnership and support and for joining us here today. I look forward to the presentation and the Q&A session following. With that, I'll turn it over to you all at Tidal Basin to lead the discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Supervisor Lucero, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and many thanks to NACo for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to continue the dialogue we've had with many of the NACo members at the annual conference around FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, or BRIC, as Supervisor Lucero mentioned. But there are also other hazard mitigation funding opportunities, and the truth is, I'll introduce myself in a couple, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've never seen this much funding available, especially from FEMA for mitigation. So the timing's right to take advantage of this. Our team here at Tidal Basin, we recognize the challenges you face while navigating the program requirements. Sometimes can be onerous, application process, and understanding the overall program goals. So today, my colleagues, Jose Valenzuela and Jacob Gray, both former former state hazard mitigation officers and myself will do our best to arm you with the resources needed to understand BRIC moving forward. Jose Valenzuela is the Senior Director of Mitigation for Tidal Basin. He's based out of Puerto Rico, and he was a former state hazard mitigation officer for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, along with other positions in the government there. Jacob Gray, Jake, was a former state hazard mitigation officer with over 17 years of experience in Kansas. So they bring the state level understanding of some of the things you're dealing with. Myself, I'm Carlos Castillo. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Development Officer for Tidal Basin. But I started my career with 26 years at Miami-Dade County. And those of you that may be familiar with Miami-Dade County, you know we were no stranger to disasters, especially hurricanes. We also, I'm proud that we made it a point to make the most out of available mitigation funding. So some of the disasters that were in fact disasters in the past are no more, in part through mitigation funding that is nowhere near what it is today. You know, the Legacy Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, or PDM, that some of you may be familiar with, that's been replaced by BRIC. And most recently, before coming to Tidal Basin, I was the acting deputy administrator for resilience at FEMA. And one of my areas was the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration. And one of the things I'm most proud of is that I oversaw the BRIC, the development of the BRIC program, and up to the first launch of it. A lot has changed, and FEMA takes advantage of information, of feedback from the community and folks like yourself to make the changes that are sometimes most needed. If I can have slide 3, please. So, you know, as emergency management and disaster recovery consultants, we realize that we have a lot of navigating to do in the state of the world today. Between COVID-19 response and natural disasters that strike consistently, many communities are unaware of the funding available to help mitigate these situations, essentially preparing a community before a disaster strikes. We're going to review a few things today to help members of NACo address the necessity of a program such as BRIC and how communities can properly utilize these programs. Jose, Jake, and I will review the BRIC program in its entirety. We'll provide a brief breakdown of the program's inception and its benefits to communities. We'll talk about program priorities, eligibility, risk, usage, and the like, and building codes. Then past approvals and FEMA's Justice 40 and set-asides. So I encourage all of you to submit questions through the Q&A function on your screen. That way it allows us to answer your questions live, and we'll have that captured as well so we can follow up if necessary. We'll also conduct an official Q&A at the end of today's discussion, and the answered Q&A along with other pertinent information will be available as a resource as well. Next slide, please. So building resilient infrastructure in communities, the program is now in its second year, and FEMA's BRIC program has increased the annual allocation to further improve resilience in communities. It's designed to set clear priorities. So think about lifelines, the community lifelines, and infrastructure, building codes, shared responsibilities and partnerships, innovative projects, adoption and enforcement of building codes, and nature-based solutions. These are all things that people like yourselves have asked for over the years, and they've been incorporated as criteria for this program. It intends to build capacity and inclusive of innovative projects, capability and capacity building activities, in-person, non-financial technical assistance, and the mitigation action portfolio selection of case studies. Will increase flexibility, which reduces limitations. You know, it's one of the things that have always been a criticism of federal programs is how rigid they are. Well, this aims to fix some of that. And there is flexibility, which sometimes ends up being a little confusing, perhaps, and overwhelming for folks that are for applicants and sub-applicants that are working on it. But that's where you need to understand the reason for the flexibility in this program that allows for it to be used in more than one situation. And the process, again, hearing from a lot of folks out there, The process is streamlined. There's a new application process through FEMA Go or FEMA grant outcomes that enable more effective and efficient applications and tracking, as well as project extensions and phased projects. The next slide, please. So the BRIC program is funded by a 6% set aside from post-disaster grant expenditures. So that means that at roughly 6% of the amount of money that FEMA has allocated, primarily through public assistance in disasters for the previous year, can be allocated for BRIC funding. So this is key to remember that this is the first time in US history, and definitely in FEMA history, that every single state has been declared a disaster, major disaster by the president. What that means is now, one, that's one of the criteria. You'd have to have been declared a disaster sometime in the previous 7 years, but also the amount of money that's been available through, well, most notably through COVID response, but some of the other areas, some of the other disasters as well, that this hopefully won't happen again, but the fact is it's time to take advantage of this. So the application period starts at the end of this month, September 30th, and you'll be able to apply for funding until January 29th of 2022. States and territories who've received a major disaster declaration within the 7 years are eligible. A couple states didn't meet that criteria before COVID, believe it or not. So now everyone, states, territories, and tribes are covered. The other thing is FEMA's making a point to reduce the risk in community lifelines. Those include safety and security, food, water, shelter, health and medical, energy, communications, transportation, hazardous waste. And that lifelines is a way that FEMA has organized the way disaster preparedness, response, and recovery, and now mitigation as well, is tracked. So it's a focus on one or more lifelines. So if your application addresses one or more, or the more of these lifelines that addresses, the better your chances are of getting funded. Now, I mentioned, this was the second year for the BRIC program, and FEMA listened, and they've added made some changes to this. So included in the changes increases the state and territory allocation subtotal by an additional $400,000 to $1 million, which includes an increase in the mitigation planning and planning related activities per applicant to $500,000. It increases a tribal set aside to $25 million. It continues to incentivize the adoption of building codes based on the latest published editions of the building codes. And that's key, because building codes have been determined. And I can tell you, coming from Miami-Dade, I've seen the benefit of strict enforced building codes and how they have on preventing and mitigating disasters. It includes a priority to enhance climate resilience and adaptation. This is new. It's something that, again, there's been a lot of requests for, but it's an opportunity to be more resilient through more creative ways in identifying some of the longer term disasters having to do with climate adaptation and resilience. I won't read all of I won't talk about all of the different changes, but those are some of the key ones. One other one is the title was revised on one of the categories from small impoverished community to economically disadvantaged rural communities. So this was a way to allow some of the smaller communities to compete with the New York cities or other major cities, that it allows them to make some key changes when it comes to resilience and to hopefully reducing the amount of disasters that we have. I spent a large part of my career responding to disasters, and the truth is I'm tired of that. I think it's time to prevent them more, and now we have the ability to do that. So hopefully we take advantage of this. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jake, who will cover some of the program priorities and eligibility and usage and other things as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And I just wanted to reiterate a couple things about the historic funding opportunities with the current mitigation dollars up for grabs through all the HMA programs. It's something that we've never seen before. Back when, PDM, which is BRIC now, was never funded, back in 2008 and 2009. And now here we are seeing $1 billion, potentially up for grabs competitively through this year's notice of funding opportunity. And then also the lifelines. The technical criteria gives you 15 points for a lifeline if one or more, but it does not mean that you just need to stop at one. If your project has more than one lifeline that it can show, then please put that in there. Being a past PDM National Technical Review Panel member, there's no doubt there's going to be a few reviewers out there and scorers that are going to be giving you more points due to the more lifelines that you show in your application during the qualitative analysis and scoring. And then moving into, to expand more on some of the activities that the BRIC program will provide is the capability and capacity building, or CNCB activities, which include subcategories of building code activities, partnerships, project scoping, mitigation planning, and planning related activities, and other related activities. The second one would be cost-effective mitigation projects that are designed to increase resiliency and public safety, that reduce injuries and loss of life, reduce damage and destruction of property, critical services, facilities, and then infrastructure from natural hazards that potentially affect climate change. And then the third would be activity would be management costs, which are greatly appreciated and needed to help reduce the administrative and financial burden on some of the subrecipients for when they apply. The BRIC program, the guiding principle on promoting equality is providing assistance that benefits disadvantaged communities in reference to EO 14008. 4 of the 6 BRIC qualitative evaluation criteria reflect the need for sub-applications to speak on of how they benefit disadvantaged communities, and those are the risk and reduction, resiliency effectiveness, populations impacted, outreach activities, and then also leveraging partners. Furthermore, BRIC reduces the non-federal cost share from 25% to 10% for those economically disadvantaged rural communities that meet that criteria. Some of the priorities this year, little small changes, most is the same, is to mitigate the risk to public infrastructure and disadvantaged communities, mitigate risk to one or more community lifelines, incorporate nature-based solutions, and then enhance climate resilience and adaptation. And then of course, building codes, you're going to hear that a lot today. And then also BRIC encourages the mitigation projects to meet multiple program priorities. And of course you do, that's just going to be higher scoring that your project will get. And then speaking of scoring, it's good to, and Jose will expand on this more, is to score yourself on your projects at the beginning and at the end, and see where you can, boost your potential score throughout the application when you're submitting it inside FEMA Go. Some of the performance measures for the project, BRIC is prioritizing the following types of projects: infrastructure projects that mitigate the risk of lifelines, that benefit disadvantaged communities as well. And we talked about those. The current national cap is $50 million for a project. So that's $50 million for a federal share. Up to 10% of that may be used for information dissemination activities, including public awareness and education, brochures, workshops. And then if anybody has any questions on that, we can expand more. The period of performance is going to be 36 months from the start date of the recipient's federal award. So that's not from the date of the actual notice of being selected for further review, but the actual award letter that you will get from FEMA once the project is fully awarded. Go ahead, next slide. We're going to go ahead and talk about risks now. With any non-disaster grant, potential there is for some risks of further burden on you of already wearing multiple hats, or taking care of, do I go for this project or do I go for that project? Where do I spend my time? So, there is contractual support out there, but the risk to that is that 75% of most of the time spent on an application will go into the pre-award and application development, especially with non-disaster grants, which are competitive nationwide. To try to reduce some of that risk, you can do, as I stated, some of the scoring criteria up front, look at the eligibility and feasibility of the project through a very conservative approach to see if that benefit cost analysis will pass, and see how you should move forward with the project selection that you have in your mitigation plan. If you can accept those RICs and you have the funds available, then you can proceed any way you wish. If not, then you can apply for a potential for an advanced assistance application through the HMGP program, or you can do direct technical assistance through the BRIC program, and those also score further points and the technical criteria if those were approved in a previous application. So those projects can reduce that risk by doing that and getting those paid for through a different approach. Pre-award costs. FEMA does allow pre-award costs now. During my tenure as the State Hazard Mitigation Officer in Kansas, this was something that was on my radar and pushed forward with pre-award costs due to the detailed budgets, the technical projects, and the detailed budget estimates that FEMA was requesting. Took a lot of work up front. So pre-award costs are much needed in this program, and you should benefit from those. But the risk is, will you get those back if the project's not selected? You won't. So that's a risk. And also I wanted to talk about current management grants, also for phase projects. So right now, currently, if you have a phase project, you only get 5% of the phase 1 approved budget until phase 2 is approved. But the current interpretation of the guidance is that you only get 5% of the phase 2 for phase 2 activities, even though you're utilizing that 75% or more, which is a conservative number, to get that project approved and through FEMA approval. So I hope FEMA changes their stance on that, and some of the states start allowing the phase 2 approval budget to go back towards those costs and pre-award and phase 1. Next slide. We'll get into building codes. So applications that have building codes receive lots of points for BRIC criteria. It's a pain point for many folks in states. Some states do not apply due to building codes alone. This is something that I don't anticipate going away, but I do know that if there was $1 billion given away last year for BRIC, that there would have been multiple projects that were selected that did not have building codes. So do not apply for the BRIC opportunity just because your scoring is low because of building codes, because with this historic amount of funding, you do have a potential for your project to go through. And if it did not get selected last year, knock the dust off of it, score it, see where it lands, and see where you can better that application. A lot of disadvantaged communities do not have building codes, so i.e. rural Alaska or Native communities. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So if you do have building codes, or you can upgrade your building codes to the current code to get those points, and you're a disadvantaged rural community, then you have a very, very good opportunity of having your project scored well and approved, making your community more resilient. And that's all I have. So I will turn it over to Jose to continue with the presentation.
Unmute. Perfect. So good afternoon. My name is Jose Luis Valenzuela. Basically, like Jake mentioned and Carlos also mentioned before, projects in the past approval that we have seen under the BRIC program, we have seen a big change or big shift between projects that are nature-based versus engineered. Just to give you an idea, the naturalization of creeks versus channeling the creeks have become a very better management process. lack of the maintenance of an engineering structure to manage floods has become a burden for the communities, and actually, and also a big risk in case of a failure. We've seen different events, the engineering structure such as levees has failed and promoted a larger disaster than expected due to the flooding, for example. Building codes, I do like this item. I know that we mentioned that it's a pain. It is. It promotes a lot of changes through the communities, but it also allows people to be more resilient. Building codes are the process that allow communities to be better prepared to handle an event. And FEMA has identified this as a flaw. If they fund projects that are not within a certain standard, are we putting people in harm's way? Are we promoting people to be in harm every time and get recurring damages to the same structure? So just keep in mind that 2 weeks ago, FEMA promoted policy, FEMA policy 206-21-0023. This is an interim policy that actually promotes freeboard into the flood-prone areas. If you are preparing a project to elevate structures, you used to do the application based on the base flood elevation. That was your standard. Now you have to increase by 2 feet of freeboard so you can protect the project more. So keep that in mind. This applies to this BRIC. NOFA applies also to COVID and future disaster declared in the next upcoming years until this interim policy is refused. But I think that it will be a policy to stay. Past project scores selected based on documentation, as much possible information they can provide to FEMA, it will be better. Let's go back to the building codes. What also building codes gives you a lower rate, potentially gives you a lower rate of insurance. If you build up to code and standards, once the insurance company comes in and appraise your property, it's not the same to have a property built up to code and standard. Nowadays, for example, 2018 ICC codes, than a structure that was built with 2012 building codes. So keep that in mind. You must demonstrate that your facility requires additional staff. Keep in mind, keep building codes. It's not only the implementation, adoption of it, is keeping track of it. You might need an inspector. You might need key staff such as architects and engineer to review the plans. You might need policy makers. You will need definitely a lot of outreach. There's a ton of education that has to be promoted out there to the professionals, to the universities, people that can actually train the professionals to implement the new building codes. So outreach is a key component, and staff is a key component. You have to have qualified staff to review the documentation submitted by professionals. Next slide, please. I think that we covered this before. Jake mentioned the benefits of the program. If we have areas of this is what we call FEMA justice, environmental justice, community justice, have different terms. Yes, BRIC will put you in a position that will allow you to have more points if your project promotes the resiliency of a community with low income, such as low income areas. A good source of information, HUD has a lot of information. The new census has a lot of information regarding what communities are within the low income areas, and impacting those areas will be a benefit. Projects such as levies, projects such as elevation of structure, implementing codes and standard in those areas will help also score big within the BRIC FEMA BRIC program. Next slide. Set-asides. In the past, we saw a lot of set-asides for and Jake, feel free to jump in. We saw a lot of set-asides in the BRIC program, and that promoted a kind of a big confusion for the communities, for the states. They thought that that money was going to be allocated to their projects. And it became a huge, at least for the state that I work with, it became some kind of a huge step back for them when they didn't see their projects approved. You have anything else to add, Jake?
Yeah, so some of the set aside money that we're seeing, doubled for states from the 500,000 and territories to $1 million, and then also the tribal set aside, I believe, is at 25 million this year for eligible tribal entities. And then to talk furthermore on your BRIC and FMA applications, if your project that you're looking to do fits inside of the flood mitigation and reduces the National Flood Insurance Program losses to a home, then please put it forward with FMA, because BRIC is so well marketed by FEMA that there's going to be a historic number of projects and dollar figures going forward. So if it meets and is a very good FMA project, then please submit it in that, and then do both if you want to, moving forward, just to get that potential funding, even a higher chance of being funded for that project.
Next slide will be, I will leave you now with Carlos.
So thank you, Jose, and thank you, Jake. At this point, we've provided some information, and there's more information here. There's BRIC resources pages. There's a lot of information on the FEMA website. As some of this, even the application is sometimes difficult to navigate, but there are different tools out there. We're available to you to answer some of your questions, or even bounce ideas off of. We've seen a lot of benefit to these mitigation projects. This past year there wasn't. There could have been more money made available in the BRIC program, because, as I mentioned, it's 6%. Estimates would have been somewhere around over $3 billion, $3.2 billion that could have been available. Unfortunately, there were roughly a little under $1 billion in applications. So typically there's more applications as there's money available, but I think it's important to show that there is the need, that there is the desire out there for this. We also understand that there's a lot of money, a lot of funding available, sometimes from different sources, that cause you to need to be aware of what the requirements are and what the differences are, whether it's HUD money, CDBG DR, CDBG mitigation. They have some different requirements, different application process, different applications in general than FEMA does. The point is, we want to encourage people to go after it, to look for assistance. What we provide, especially in whether it's in the application or in the actual work, that's can be funded by the project, by the grant money itself. So it's an opportunity to educate yourselves on what's out there, to learn that FEMA's made the difference, made the changes based on what it's been hearing. Not all of it's been changed, because it's sometimes difficult to move these things, but there are reasons why they've made the changes. So providing this information, there's frequently asked questions and other tools, especially available at the NACo website. And I know that the recording will be made available, as well as some of the notes from this. With that, I want to turn it over to Supervisor Lucero to open it up for questions and any other comments. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you all so much for that presentation. Really great information and resources. But before we dive into the Q&A and further discussion, I want to kick off that discussion first with a peer learning opportunity and invite Supervisor James Gore from Sonoma County, if he or his team are on the line, to share and give us some insight on the BRIC process, since you've been through it and you were awarded a substantial BRIC program. So Thank you. Are you there, James?
I am. Can you hear me, Deborah?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and thank you for your leadership. And I want to stress that being involved in this Resilient Counties Advisory Board over the last 5 years and being a past chair for a couple of years, it's provided a venue to be able to deal with this chaos that's in our communities, and not just a venue to learn best practices, but to advocate. So, it's great to be here because, I had the opportunity on behalf of NACo to testify, in Congress before implementation of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which really kicked the BRIC program into high gear. All those folks on the call from Tidal Basin and others, it's go time. We all worked our butts off to be able to get to the world of mitigation instead of just the continual throwing money at response and recovery. And so Carlos, I hear you loud and clear. Being from a community that's had 16 disasters, or we've activated our emergency operations center 16 times in 6.5 years since I've taken office, with about 9 of those being key presidentially declared disasters, mega fires, mega floods. The words historic and unprecedented are getting to become trite and not so historic anymore. We all know that. So it's like, what do we do, right? Instead of just operating on the old system. Like many of you in different communities, after we got hit by a disaster in previous years, we were able to mobilize and go after the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the post-hazard mitigation grant program, really focused on helping communities not have second or third disasters on top of each other. And those helped. And we were able to, through a ton of work and applications, working with consultants, we were able to get more than $30 million in HMGP dollars coming back into our community for a variety of efforts. But the advent of BRIC really offered us an opportunity to make a game change. So if I really think through this, I got a couple process points, and I'm going to get to the product. Number one is that while we've talked through, and the good folks at Tidal Basin, I just had a call with them last week, went through all of the overarching stuff that's needed. I want to reflect that, the how of putting together an application and having a coalition that's locally led and working on that is such an important base. But then you also have to write a damn good application. So you need to have the know-how. And if you don't have that within your county, or you're a county that's not really bigger than 500 or 600,000, kind of like we are, where you have a dedicated office to doing these grants and other things that we've created in response to these events, it's really hard to get the capacity. So, I'm a big fan of working with folks like Tidal Basin and others to make sure that you get things lined up, that you don't lose a good idea and a bunch of groundswell of import with an application that doesn't really fit the needs. For any of you like me who's been involved in the past in either developing proposals or writing proposals or writing requests for proposals, is you have to match what the needs are on the ground with the program and how it's offered. You can't have there be a disconnect. It's like, some people think they're really good authors, but nobody buys their books, right? So you got to make sure that it links together. So the first thing that we have really done organizationally is, as I mentioned before, is we created an Office of Recovery and Resiliency in our county. We morphed that into really a special projects and grants division. And now we make sure that we don't just work on these projects, but we stay in close coordination with our state Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES, and that we make sure this stuff is lined up, that we are known not only as a group that can create a good proposal, but we can execute projects on the ground. We don't have clawback issues. We don't have accounting issues. So being able to show that robust ability to envision programs, to build community support, and then on the other side, to be able to deliver those programs and deliver on the accounting and the accountability of those programs with project management is key. And so I have to say that before we get into just the nifty project and the ideas. So for me, let's focus directly on wildfires in the West. We've, since 2017, had 4 mega fires that have torched us. And I know there's others on this call, just like Deborah Lucero, representing the area of Butte County and Paradise, another fire this year. I mean, we've lost, I think, 7,000 structures since 2017, 24 lives lost. And we've also, had huge other ancillary disruptions to our community. One of the things that we initially really took as the point of the spear was the need to drastically improve our emergency response and then our recovery program. So we went directly into things like alert and warning, testing those things with the public, doing community organizing, getting back onto the ground and getting everybody ready, establishing evacuation zones with clear information, getting all of our work together so that our emergency operations center was always at a warm status, not at a cold status. In effect, we're ready at any time to jump. What that meant is that the difference between in 2017 getting caught on our heels and having to evacuate people in the middle of chaos, like many of these events are, as opposed to taking a lesson from those who have predicted hurricanes and worked on that over the years and evacuating people so they can have emergency responders really do emergency work. That was the first thing that we really had to do. So in 2019, when we had a Kincaid fire, which was a similar event to our 2017 Sonoma Complex fires, historic winds that turn a fire into a natural disaster, other issues, we were able to evacuate 40% of our population. We were able to have folks in the Emergency Operations Center from the National Weather Service, far advancing predictability on how far we had to evacuate people, what the Embercast was going to be. And what that allowed our emergency responders to do was sit in those communities and prepare for basically the rain of fire that came when the winds went up to 90 miles an hour on the peak of the mountains and 40 miles an hour down on the valley floors, right? Once again, if you've ever seen something like that, it's not a fire, it is a full barrage, right? And so by evacuating 40% of our population, we had people embedded in those communities, stopping conflagrations before one house became 5, became 100, became 5,000. And so they were able to do that work instead of evacuating people midstream. So you put that aside and you say, okay, that's one work in terms of disaster management, response, resilience. Okay, we're doing good there. Okay, now we got to get to the true resilience, the grunt work, the trench warfare, home hardening, defensible space, calming areas in the mountains, shaded fuel breaks, fire access roads. The reason I call these trench work is because these are thick, difficult, sweat equity, high resource intense programs. But to be able to true risk management and in effect, allow good fires to burn and promote that, but be able to hold the lines when the big conflagrations, when those winds, as I say, turn a fire into a natural disaster, need to get embedded into those programs. So what have we done? Well, a lot so far, but it's getting going and it's got some steam. So we have been awarded this past year a $37 million grant from FEMA, the BRIC program, which we are matching with $13 million of local funds for our cost share. And we are deploying a program which, the BRIC grant application title is Wildfire Resilient Sonoma County, Nature-Based Mitigation to Adapt in an Area of Megafire. Okay. Beyond that nice title, I do want to state, Jack, that I sent you the scoping narrative of the project itself so that you could share it with anybody on this call. And I'll also send it to our list of Resilient Counties members as well. But this also supplements this program, which is 37 plus 13 local. So that's $50 million program, supplements an additional 25 million that we put from ironically, our lawsuits with our utility provider because of the cause of that initial fire. That puts us with federal and local, about $75 million into forest stewardship, land management, and home hardening, and really wildfire resilience. And then we also have money we're targeting at the state and pushing through our California State Association of Counties, where I'm the president, to make sure that those hit the ground as well. So you're talking about rationally thinking in 3 to 5 years, $100 million going into this effort. Now you have to show demonstrable benefits, right? This isn't just about planning and nice maps and other things like that, but you've got to show the ability to do it. So back to what Tidal Basin, our folks said, and Carlos and others, is that, the first thing you got to do is you got to match the requirements of FEMA and Cal OES. You want your local or your state emergency office to be fully supportive of your project, or you won't get it. So you got to work in consultation on the front end with them. And so the overarching goals of our project, number one, is something that was mentioned earlier in the presentation, is to provide protection to the county identified lifelines, right? So what are we talking about? Water infrastructure, transportation that allows safety and security, communication systems, in effect, things like in our fires in 2017, a bunch of the grid dropped because 20 plus of our signal towers for cell coverage dropped and got disconnected or didn't have battery backup. So we're all learning, we all know that resiliency is about much more than just the actual event. It's the ancillary impacts. The do we have battery backup for our cell system to be able to communicate effectively with people? So another one is working hand in hand with private property owners to create and maintain defensible space. That includes inspections that we already do, laws we've changed locally to do enhanced inspection and requirement of vegetation removal or reduction. So we got county folks going out there. Some people don't like it when they get a tag on their door that says you got to manage your vegetation, but our mantra is private property rights come with private property responsibilities. And so we're not just tagging people to do it, but we're also providing free chipper program. We're also doing structural hardening assessments as a part of this program, education outreach, and even cash incentives to property owners to do this work. So we want to make it a carrot and a stick. Hey, you got to do this, right? But here's the opportunities we're coming in to help benefit it. So before I go into some of the exact details, we have picked 3 target areas, 2 of them that have burnt recently, a Larkfield project area in the footprint of our 2017 fires. There's a bunch of fire-scarred vegetation that needs treatment. Our Wallbridge fire during the pandemic this past year that threatened both Guerneville and Hillsburg areas. We have shaded fuel breaks, other work with private landowners there. And then we have an area that has not burnt since 1965, but this is the Pengrove project area. The reason I mention these 3 is because, we can't protect as government and as institutions, everybody who lives in a high-risk area, especially the sparsely populated ones. We can support their work, but a lot of that change is going to be driven by insurance changes and also programs that we can support. But our focus area for this money is really to go into areas where we have the wild urban interface and we have large populations. Once again, all the fires that we've had since 2017, unfortunately, we've lost homes in Sonoma County, 200, 300, 400. But we haven't hit back into that area where in 2017, where the chaos really put the blowtorch all the way over into the urban core and burnt 5,000 homes. So that's the goal, is we can't stop fires or protect everybody from everything, but we also want to focus on those areas and create calming landscapes that allow this to go forward, right? And allow us to get a community benefit, not just individual property benefits. So, once again, I'm going to share the application, but, what does this include? We're talking about landscape fuels treatment and vegetation management. We're talking about vegetative fuel management within 100 feet of structures, talking about home hardening. In our case out here, embers cause 80% of the wildland fire home ignitions. Not radiant heat, not direct heat, right? So this is all about connecting with landowners and connecting with people. 95% of our land in Sonoma County is privately owned, privately held land. We do not live in a place that has Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management. We got to work with people. So some of our objectives are to inspect and assess 10,000 residential properties in those project areas to be funded by this program, by us with the match and the federal cost share. Convening 18 more meetings and outreach to another 20,000 residents, assess up to 80% of the buildings in those areas for structural hardening, and provide incentives. And so, if I talk about incentives, right, one of the things that's been proposed is for us to look at, providing as much as $2,500 for defensible space or $6,000 for a property for home hardening. But the other thing that we're really working through is to try and create a better program here, one that allows us to say, okay, here's $2,500 or $6,000, but we can put that towards a loan, a PACE, property assessed clean energy loan on your property, because your home hardening probably will cost $15,000 to $25,000. So instead of having like we actually have a PACE program that we fund out of our county treasury, it comes with a 7% interest tag on it. And we have other partners like Y Green and the Hero program and others that promote those in our community. But with those PACE programs, what we're looking to do is basically pay down the interest rate or provide people an opportunity to where it makes sense. That once again, we're trying to help, but you have to bear the responsibility to do the work as a landowner. And this is one where every person who signs up can protect more homes. So long story short is that this, as I mentioned before, this supplements an additional 25 million that we've allocated. We've appropriated already 8 to 9 million of that onto the ground. We have another 15 million that we're going to go towards priority projects. Additionally, there's all these opportunities to create, a joint powers authority on risk reduction, parcel taxes to fund this work long term. But this is really enough money that gives us an opportunity to make a substantial and sustained 2 to 5 year effort to really turn the tide on the risks that have been presented before us. And so we're in it. And one of the reasons that I want to share the scoping narrative, and I've said that before, is that this project for us in Sonoma County, it will only be true risk reduction if our partner counties, surrounding counties, get similar programs. So I want to see next year that Napa and Solano and Marin and Mendocino and Lake counties are getting these projects. I want to see that Butte County is getting these projects. So the goal there is what I'm saying is, work with a group like Tidal Basin, find a way to put together, not just if you're an individual county, especially if you're smaller with lower capacity or not as much, in kind, put in a multi-jurisdiction proposal. One of the things I'm going to follow up is with the other counties that I mentioned surrounding us and see if we can support through what we learned through our proposal, if we can support their proposals. Why? Because wildfires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts could care less about our jurisdictional lines. Our fireshed is a very large area. And the only way that we're resilient is as a region. So with that being said, I'm going to stop and just say that I encourage everybody to dive forward and challenge your institutions to go after this while the money's on the table. It took a lot of urgency for us to also not just ask our staff, who's been through so many disasters and is exhausted, to put in applications, but then to look at them when they said they didn't have the capacity and to add either that capacity through contractors like Tidal Basin or FTEs, or actually it's not an or, it's more of a yes and than an either or. And so I encourage you to remember that if the capacity isn't there within your community, you can work with a partner, you can put this together, you can team up with multiple jurisdictions, and you can start to move towards true resiliency. So thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here and join us in the resiliency movement, which is about defining the new normal, not being defined by it. Thank you.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Supervisor Gore. We have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to open it up to people on the line to ask questions either of Supervisor Gore or of Tidal Basin. I can see that there have been some questions in the Q&A, and it appears that Tidal Basin is answering those online for folks. But does anybody, would anybody like to be recognized with a question? If you could raise your hand, that would be awesome. I know that was a lot of information. And if you want to raise your hand, that's down on the toolbar down below. And it's a little icon that says raise hand. And if you click it, it will raise a hand. Okay, we have one from Heather Stickler that says, does the 40% rule change what other communities would receive in terms of dollar amount for program funding? That sounds like it's for Tidal Basin.
Yeah, I'll jump on this one. This is Jake. It does not receive, it does not, to answer the question easily, but FEMA is still looking into how they're going to implement their full 40%. I don't think that they're going to have 40% of BRIC dollars going to disadvantaged communities with all the other programs. I think they believe that whatever they're just going to try to reach the 40% based on all of their programs and all of their dollars and all their technical assistance. But how that's all being hashed out has not been completely set in stone at this time.
Okay. Kitty Barnes asks, can you speak to the role of a state's emergency agency and their role in moving applications forward? And I saw this pop up. I was thinking maybe Supervisor Gore, do you want to speak to that?
Hey there, Deborah. Can you, I lost connectivity there. Can you ask that again? What pertaining to what?
They're asking, can you speak to the role of a state's emergency agency and their role in moving applications forward?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest reasons that we got our application funded was because Cal OES was fighting for us front and center. And that's everybody from Mark Ghilarducci, who's the head of OES, who, you know, we have a great partnership with, and all the staff there, and also people like our FEMA regional administrator, Bob Fenton, who actually was the administrator in the time of the new administration when it changed. You know, so I think the key here is to remember that these applications, more than any I've ever seen, is about partnership and ability to deliver. These are not create an application and send it in. They're not going to fund $37 million if they don't have confidence that you've done HMGP programs before, if your local hazard mitigation isn't tight, if they're going to sniff out if you can deliver and if you have ground truth embedded into your application. So, the recommendation from your state is paramount. But once again, I also think that's why it's really good to look at multi-jurisdiction projects and not just trying to have every one of us go and gobble up $50 million all over, because even though there's a ton of money on the table, if I'm somebody who's a funder out of FEMA, I'm going to want to try and get some wins. And once again, when I say that, there's nothing that says if you get funded once that you can't apply for 3 next year.
Great. Okay. And then one last question, and we are nearly at our time. Is the 6% funding allocation or grant funding availability based on each state's respective public assistance disaster expenditures? And that sounds like it's for Tidal Basin.
I can answer that. So no, the 6% is what the large amount, what's available nationwide, that comes from the previous year's funding. And it's a guide. You know, I mentioned that 6% wasn't the total amount used. It was much smaller based on what was expected in terms of applications and other reasons. So no, that doesn't affect what each state has available or what each state was allocated in terms of public assistance funding. It's more the general allocation.
All right. Do we have any more questions, Elena?
Deborah, I just wanted to speak on one thing. I wanted to reiterate on the state's emergency agency's role in moving applications forward.
Yes.
Is that every state's going to have their own timeframes that you need to have your application in by. So be aware of those. Just because the notice of funding opportunity for FEMA is January, those are going to be different for each state. And then each state does everything differently when it comes to rolling out their BRIC program, and what they support, what they don't support, their priorities are. They're going to do their own scoring. They're going to push forward the projects they believe that have the best opportunity of being funded.
All right. Well, I really want to thank Tidal Basin. I know you have been extremely helpful in Butte County, where we've lost 19,000 structures in one fire and 86 lives, and you've been wonderful. So thank you to Tidal Basin. And I would encourage small counties out there to look toward partnering with someone who can write, as James Gore said, a damn good application, because you need one. So thank you to everyone who joined today. Thanks to Jack for putting this together. Always really good work from our staff at NACo. Thanks again. And remember, this recording will be available on the NACo website. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks.